Hi, okay, welcome back. And this is our continuing lecture on the political thoughts of properly understand the ideas of Edmund Burke. You see, context is essential in so many ways because, especially when we discuss ideas, philosophy, or any sort of social thought that has implications upon the lives of many and upon the life of the society itself, then it is very essential to understand the context in which one speaks of, right? So, previously we discussed the very briefly we discussed the French Revolution, and in that lecture, right, if you have not watched it, I would recommend that you go back and watch that video before you watch this, because it will give you a better idea about the ideas of Burke. I'm sorry, of Burke. Brought out into maturity the thoughts of Burke and what we now today know as the Burkean conservative, right? Conservatism, Burkean conservatism, and it is very, very different in so many ways with regards to conservatism that we know of today, what we now know as the modern conservatism, right? So Burke is popularly known to be the father of modern conservatism, which I think is in many sense a misnomer, because he was not only a supporter of the American Revolution, right? Because literally, if you would think that if you are a conservative, right, you would be against revolution, right? You would be against the American Revolution. I mean, in back in his days, right? But he was not supporter of the American Revolution, supporter of the Irish independence, as well as a persistent prosecutor of misdeeds with regard to British, regardless of where my political leanings are, because I have no political leaning in any sense. But then if you are to be a conservative, I do think that liberal as an ideology is kind of misled in so many ways. But nevertheless, coming back to the issue, Burke is by no stretch of imagination the kind of conservative we know of today. What we call and understand by the concept of conservatism is a far cry from the version or the kind of conservatism which Burke held there and believed. This I think is important. This I think is an important distinction that we have to make, and we should make this. And I would want you to understand this also, because we have to make this distinction and discern, because today most academicians, intellectuals, and liberal leaning persons and individuals, they kind of recklessly categorize Burke to the kind of today's conservative ideals which Burke himself never or would not have admitted to or acknowledged to, right? He would have stayed as far off from what we today call as conservative, right? Because I will get to that later, but then here's the thing. In today's context, or in present context, the word conservative, right, holds a negative connotation, right? It has this pejorative undertone, right? Coupled with we think that those who are conservative, we think that they are ardent supporter for the blind return to the past, right? They romanticize and glorify to an unimaginable and unrealistic degree about the serenity and the harmony of the past society, right? Which in many sense it's conservative, right? When we hear the word conservative, right, that's what we think. We think about people who are negative, right? Who are narrow-minded, who are all about traditions, right? Traditional customs, culture, and all the practices, whatnot, blindly, uncritically, and in many instances, uncritically support those of the past, right? When we think of conservative today, things that come out of the first thing that comes to our mind is that a person who is conservative is wholly committed to traditional values, right? Committed to traditional ideas, right? Committed to traditional values, traditional ideas, with more or less opposition to changes or any sort of innovations in the society, right? Or like we think that those who are conservative, or the thing that comes to our mind is that a conservative person is one who likes to maintain status quo, and in many sense they are today's conservative. I'm talking about today's conservative, not Burke's conservative. And then we also think that those who are conservative are, they do refuse, or they are critically glorify the authority of the past and all things past, right? And and in some instances they literally aim to return, like the ultimate goal of being a conservative for many, which is wrongfully, I suppose, erroneously, they think that they can literally return to the past, to the past times, right? For instance, for instance, why do you think that, for instance, one of the key goals about the Nazism, for example, right? Nazism, during Hitler's time, they it was not explicitly mentioned, but you could see it, right? That they wanted to return to the glories of the past, right? Glories of the Aryan civilization, of the Aryan race. I mean, really, I mean that's what you get. And even right now, in some parts of say, for instance, even in China right now, China presently, they do want to relive the glories of its past civilization, right? So I'm not saying they're conservative. I'm just saying that's what conservative thinks. That is what conservatism means to us today, right? Indeed, the first thing that comes to our mind, right, when we hear of the word conservative, are racist people, right? Like, for instance, Donald Trump or Narendra Modi here in India, right? Or, for instance, Indians, right? Because Indians are very, very racist, right? Indians are one of the most racist people on planet, right? I do not know how to put to words, because all words fail to express the conservatism. But then these were not. But the thing is this is what we now know as conservative. But when Brooks speaks, or when Burke speaks of conservatism, or when we talk of Burke as a conservative, his sort of conservatism was very, very different from what we now know of today, right? Burke was none of these things, right? He was none of these things. He did not want to be changed, right? Or he did not oppose necessary reforms and changes in the society, nor did he sideline the right to criticize the existing states of affair. Because if you look at it, he was a supporter of the American Revolution. He was a member. He was a party member of the. He belonged to a party, or to a political party known as the Whigs, which was formed during the Glorious Revolution, right? And the Whig Party, which is the Liberal Party in England, in his days was called the Whig. That party was based on the ideals of liberalism, which was embodied by John Locke, right? So we cannot say that he is the conservative that we now know of, right? But his sort of conservatism was very different from the sort of conservatism which we think of today. So he did not uncritically accept status quo. He would necessarily regard that changes and reforms are necessary if things need be. He did not sideline or undermine the right to criticize the existing states of affairs, right? And I think that, for instance, I think that some of the contemporary prominent personalities that embodied Burke's sort of conservatism were political theorists and philosophers, such as, for instance, Michael Oakeshott, right? Or Leo Strauss, the great philosopher and political theorist. Then we have Eric Voegelin. Then you have Russell Kirk, and then you also have Sir Roger Scruton, right? And I would also include Sir Isaiah Berlin, right? Regardless, I think he's a conservative. We tend to think that he's a liberal, but then more or less, you if you read him, he's not what liberal makes him of, right? And that's why I admire Sir Isaiah Berlin a lot. And also, we could also bring in the 19th century French scholar, Alexis de Tocqueville, right? I think so. These thinkers and political theorists, I think if you read them, you'll find that the sort of conservative we find today in today's world is a far cry from the sort of conservative that Burke embodied, and all these thinkers which I've mentioned embodied. So the foundation of Burke's political thoughts and beliefs is that he, like Aristotle and like Cicero, and then if you think and if you have read Aristotle, Cicero, Montesquieu, and Burke, you'll find that these thinkers are aligned more or less. If you, it's wrong to put them in a political spectrum, because these are great thinkers you cannot categorize and pigeonhole them into this into some sort of political spectrum, saying that they lean here and there. That is quite wrong. But then if you were to know, nevertheless, but you'll find that if you did, then you'll find that Burke and Aristotle and the great Roman orator and statesman and philosopher Cicero, and also Montesquieu, the French philosopher Montesquieu, they will all fall within the same category. I mean, it's wrong to categorize them, but just for the sake of simplicity, they would fall under the same group. And their rationality, not their rationality, but their views of the world, right? And their beliefs and their thoughts more or less align, and which is a good thing because great minds think alike, right? So the foundation of Burke's political thought is that, like Aristotle and Cicero, he too believed that human reason or rationality is limited and fallible. You see, and Burke was saying that human rationality has a limit. It is not perfect. Because remember, what happened was that before Burke's time, right, leading up to Burke's time, what you find was the the victory, right? What you find was the culmination of centuries of the influence of Renaissance, of the reasons of the victory and culmination of the triumph of human rationality, triumph of science, right? Triumph of science and rationality over superstition, over religion, over blind beliefs on things which cannot be proven, right? They put a high, they put a high value on human rationality. But then Burke was saying, no, human rationality by its very nature is limited and it's fallible. And then it Burke's views resonates that of Aristotle and Cicero and also of Montesquieu. And if you have read Aristotle, which we have, is that Aristotle also mentions that human rationality is limited, that we put too much value on human rationality, that human reasoning. And that's one of the areas in which Aristotle criticized or was against his teacher, Plato, and Plato's teacher, Socrates, right? So it is limited. I remember Aristotle saying in I think it was, I'm not even politics or ethics, was in politics, I think. He mentioned saying that human beings, that the rationality, that the power of human rationality is so limited that it is not prudent, it is not proper for us to think about the essence or the aspects or the features of a supreme being, right? Because we are limited, our mind is limited, hence we can never comprehend the limitless, we can never comprehend the infinity, we can never comprehend the omniscience, the omnipotent of the supreme being, which I think is quite right. So it is not so he was saying, Burke was saying that it is not human rationality is limited, that it is not perfect, as it is taught by philosophers and theories of his age and of the past ages. On assuming, he says that, on assuming, if we are to assume the unrealistic reliance on the naked power of rationality, right? When we do that, people make unrealistic, right, utopian exaggeration of the power of theoretical reason and of human perfection, right? Of human perfectibility, right? That human beings, in other words, that human beings or calling upon its rational power can, for instance, bring to a realization or an attainment of a perfect society, right? attainment of a perfect society, of a perfect social harmony, of equality, and of liberty, right? We think that when we put too much reliance, when we rely too much on the limited capacity of human rationality erroneously, we think that we can bring into existence, right? We can bring into existence a perfect society, because whenever you look at the present society, right? Whenever you look at the present society, it's always found to be one thing, right? You look at it and you say, something is not right. This is not right. That is not right. Too much corruption going on. Too much inequality. Too much injustice going on. See, you will never find a society that is perfect. But then what happens is that because of human reasoning, right, we think that because we think in our mind everything can be perfect. We can change this, we can change that. If something is wrong over here, we can change it. If something is bad over here, we can tweak it and we can change it, right? Right? And we think about solutions in our head, and then we think if only the solutions that we have dreamt of or the solutions that we have thought of, and if we implement them into reality, then things will be fine, right? And that's what Burke is saying. That's what Burke is criticizing. That it's not right to, it's not proper that you can actually call into this abstraction of ideas and principles and then try to implement them into a reality and say that, and then by implementing it onto the reality, you attain perfection of human society, right? Of social harmony, of equality, and so forth. It is also, he says, it is also imprudent, right, to assume that there is one whole rational and single best solution, or single best institution, or single best systems of governance, right? In other words, living together, right? Because you see, what he's saying is that there is no such thing as one, or there is no such thing as a single best solution to a problem regarding society. There's no single best political institution in the world, right? Or political or systems of governance in the world, which I think, I mean, if you actually think about it, right, it makes sense. You can't expect, for instance, say for instance, we may think that because we are here in Nagaland, right? Here in Nagaland, we practice traditional laws and customs, right? And say, for instance, that we like it so much that we look at those traditional values to be perfect. Now, and say, for instance, that those traditional values and practices which we are currently practicing is good, right? Assuming, for instance, for example, that they work for us. Now, in trying to say, for instance, in trying to implement those same values and norms and traditions onto another society, right? Onto another society, a society where you have different values, different norms, different religion, right? Different mores. It would be imprudent and in a sense wrong to assume that just because these things work for us, it will likewise work for, say, for instance, in a Japanese society, or in South Korea, or in America, or in UK, or Australia, or New Zealand, or Canada, right, or Mexico, or Argentina, or in Africa, not the whole continent, obviously, but in Zambia or Botswana, right, or in South Africa, right? It's You don't have such a thing, and this is, and it brings, and it makes us think as to how we sometimes, in order to make things better, make things worse, right? Say, for instance, when Burke was saying that it is wrong or imprudent to assume that there's one whole rational or single best solution or single best institutions or single best system of governance, right? Living together, it reminded me of I'm not going to go far back, but it reminded me of the Arab Spring, which took place in 2011, right? Which started from Tunisia and spread all the way to North Africa and to the Levant and into the Middle East, right? And there, it made me realize, right? Because I was thinking about this. Nowadays, today in today's world, we tend to think that there is only one best form of governance, right? Right? We assume that there is only one best solution of governance in the world, and we think that the best system of governance here in the world right now, presently, is democracy, right? We think democracy is the best form of governance. Now, it really does not matter what I think about democracy personally, right? But say, for instance, that is the claim, and that is not it is not the claim I'm making, but it is what it is right now, because everybody wants to be a democratic country. I do not know what that is, but then that's what it is claimed. Many people, many states in the world, and it is openly encouraged that states which are not democratic should transform their society, should transform their system of governance into democracy. So the thing is, in 2011, right, we had the Arab Spring, right? We had a revolution that sparked off Indonesia, right, and spread all the way to Libya, Morocco, and to Egypt, and to Syria, and to Yemen, and to Bahrain, right? But the thing is this: when this revolution first started, right, when it began, and then when you saw this authoritarian, then kind of tyrannical regimes in those countries being overthrown by the people, right? Most of the Western academicians, intellectuals, and some liberal individuals, what they saw in that moment in time, because I was there in the United States when this happened, was that they thought that from now on, finally, finally, the people in the Middle East, right? The society in the Middle East have finally come to a realization that democracy is the best form of governance, right? It's the best form of governance. Finally, the Islamic countries in the Middle East are finally turning towards democracy. People have had it, right? They are tired of tyrannical, authoritarian, right? Governments which are chaotic, governments which are not accountable, not transparent, right? And governments who rule, right? Who rule because they put the whole society under under its command, under its authority, and hence people began to think in mostly in Western societies, they began to assume that finally democracy has triumphed in the Middle East, right? That democracy has triumphed in the Middle East. Now, from then on, you saw the fall of Mubarak, for example, for instance, in Egypt. You saw the fall of Mubarak in Egypt, right? It was a glorious moment for Western media, for academicians, especially in political science and international relations. They were having a time talking about, oh, the triumph of democracy, right? And and the thing is this: fast forward to today, right? 2020, 2020. If you, if you look at it, none of the states, right? None of the states where the Arab Spring took place is in good condition, right? Look at Egypt. Egypt is now ruled by an authoritarian government, right? It's ruled by Al Sisi, right? We have to admire him. I'm just kidding. No, no. But see, he overthrew the democratically elected government, the president of Egypt, and then he carried out the coup d'etat, and then there you go. He became the president of Egypt, right? Authoritarian rule. He is, in other words, the Arab Spring have managed to just get rid of Mubarak, who was also a military person, right? Who came to power through coup d'etat, and now it is now Mubarak is now replaced by, say, for instance, Al Sisi, right? Who came to power through coup d'etat. Look at Syria, right? Look at Syria. The disease of Arab Spring reached Syria, right? And what happened? People thought, oh, even in Syria, democracy must prevail, right? Look at the result. Even to this day, in 2020, right? The civil war is still ongoing. The war which started then, it's still going on. Imagine people, how many lives have been lost over an abstract ideal, democracy, freedom, right? Which is not even real. Imagine how many lives have been lost. Imagine the magnitude of destruction in Syria. The whole society is absolutely destroyed. In fact, before 2011, in the Middle East, in the Levant, for instance, Syria was doing quite well. Socioeconomically, it was doing quite well. But look at what happened now. Now we have reduced Syria to rubbles, right? Millions of people have fled Syria, and it has created a major epidemic of refugees in Europe, in America, right? You see, over an abstract ideal democracy, thinking we people thinking that this abstract ideal is the best solution to a form of governance, to a century old problem of how do we live together, right? That's what political science is. How do we live together, right? It's all about study of how do we live together. And saying that democracy is an abstract concept, democracy, which nobody can define, where we have no definition, consensual definition about democracy, over an abstract ideal, we have managed to destroy not only a country, reduce it to rubbles, but also destroy the lives of many innocent civilians. Right? Look also in Yemen, the civil war, which was in part a part of Arab Spring. It goes on even to this day. Now, even in Yemen, people are starving. People are dying of starvation. Civil war still going on even to this day, right? Even in Syria, over an abstract ideal as to what system of governance should we have, right? Now, Syria, for instance, and Yemen, for instance, have become a, a proxy war for superpowers, right? For superpowers trying to gain influence in Middle East, right? In Yemen, you have the Saudi Arabia, so the Saudis, and the UAE against the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels, right? Now it's not only a fight between Yemenis, but also a proxy war between Saudi Arabia, UAE on the one hand, and Iran on the other hand. In Syria, for instance, now you have a proxy war, right, between America on one hand, America, Western Europe on one hand, Russia on the other, Turkey on another, right? Iran on another, right? You see, now it has become a battleground for this country, right? You see, I'm not trying to exaggerate my my wisdom, but in 2012, right, and in 2012, 2012, right after the Arab Spring, when in the midst of when in America everybody was talking high and mighty about the triumph of democracy, I presented a paper, right, in a conference. In the name of the conference I forgot. It was Western Social Science Association, right? It was in Houston in 2020, in 2012, and there I presented the paper arguing why the democracy will never work in why democracy is not possible or it's not probable in Middle East. And then I tried to make that argument by examining the the philosophical as well as theological um, ideals of Islam and its society, right? And I was arguing that because of these ideals, you can never the Arab Spring, which we find now, right? The Arab Spring, which have come about in the Middle East, Levant, and North Africa, is that the result will be very different from what we expect. Democracy will not last. Even if there's democracy in Egypt, right? It will revert back to some sort of non-democratic system of governance, right? I mentioned all those things, and guess what? Now, if you look at 2020, in 2020, it's like that, right? Right? you won't find a purely democratic state in those countries where Arab Spring occurred. You see, so that's what Burke was saying, because we think that because we put so high of a value on human rationality, we think that the product of our human rationality, right? We think that because of that, we think that, oh, this is possible. We dream up of some abstract ideal and try to implement that abstract ideal into reality, which in many sense it does not work out. So just a quick so that's what he was saying, right? It's imprudent to think that there's one best single solution or single system of governance to take care of the age old problem of how do we live together, right? Because you have to, in order to think about such issues, Berg is saying you have to understand the historical problems, the political problems of a society, right? In other words, the context of a society. Rather, what he was saying was that rather what we can realistically, rather than thinking about what we can realistically and pragmatically attain in that what we can realistically attain is that we must, in our, whenever we think of coming up with some sort of not a solution, but how do we best deal with the problem, right? How do we resolve this issue? How do we resolve the problem? For Burke, he was not talking about some abstract ideal. Rather, he says we must be, for instance, we must understand the social experiences, right? In other words, the wisdom of the age, right? Right? The wisdom of the age. All those things, the traditional wisdoms which we have, right? We must look to that because those wisdoms comes from our social experience of a particular society, right? So we must look at that. We must also have prudence, political prudence, and this goes back to the idea of Aristotle as well as Cicero, right? So we must also have this. We must practice in order to truly tackle an issue. We need to have political prudence. We must also show practical judgments and also utilize principles that tend to hide the messy realities of life of society. And then um, when we do have political prudence and when we do practice practical judgments and try to take into account the knowledge, the wisdoms of the ages that we have of our particular society, then it brings us to some sort of recognition that some actions or some institutions or some systems of governance or some solutions are better than others, right? Instead of saying this is the best solution, this is the best solution, this is the single best solution for the entire world of the entire society in the world, rather instead of saying that, we come up by saying, oh, maybe some actions are better for us, some institutions are better for us, maybe some systems are better for us, and this resonates the ideas of Montesquieu, right? This this parallels the ideas of Montesquieu as well. And indeed, for Montesquieu, that's how you. That's why for Montesquieu, there's no such thing as a good law or a bad law, right? A law is a law. It works well somewhere in some society, and it does not work in others, right? A law that works well in one society may not work well in another society. So that's why, much in the same way, similarly, making the same sort of argument, saying that when we do show prudence, when we do show a sense of practical judgments on our side and do take into consideration the knowledge which we have accumulated, right, throughout the centuries, we can use that and come up with some sort of solution that is good for us or good for one particular society, which may not necessarily be good for others. So much in the same way, democracy may be good for, say, for instance, Western society, but then it may not necessarily be good for a society which is, say, for instance, has a different values and norms, like the Islamic countries in the Middle East, right? Because the Western society and the Islamic society, they don't share the same values, right? They don't share the same norms or mores, right? It's different. In other words, to use Burke's own terms, customs and manners and habits are different, right? So we must take into consideration those manners, right? Which again, Montesquieu would say, like, of course, Burke is influenced by Montesquieu as well. So in Montesquieu's own terms, right? If you read the Persian letters, right? Montesquieu's Persian letter, he mentions customs and habits, right, of a different society, right? So much in the same way, whenever you take into account those things, then you may realize that abstract ideals such as democracy may not necessarily work just because it kind of works well in Western society. It does not. It will not. It will not work well. It will work well in the Middle East, right? We cannot say that just because it works well in, say, for instance, in America, doesn't mean that it will work well in, say, for instance, Saudi Arabia or Bahrain or UAE or Doha. I'm sorry, or Qatar, right? So that's what he was saying. Certainly, like, right, he would say that to think otherwise, to think that there is one solution for everything, right, for everybody, would be rather naive and also misleading, right? Burke, see, Burke's prescription, as well as that of Burkean conservatism, is that his prescription is, or prescriptions are based on what he regards as experience rather than reason. You see, he relies much on experience. It's very similar to the ideas of Cicero and Aristotle, and even that of Montesquieu, right? You really can't. Whenever you read Burke, you always the ideas of Aristotle, Cicero, and Montesquieu are always popping up. Always, you always have these thinkers at the back of your mind whenever you do read Burke. And so, for him, for Burke, the prescription for him, his his whole basis of prescriptions are based on what he regards as experience, right, rather than reason. Or by experience, Burke means experiences of the past, right, gained and accumulated over several generations, right, and he values that more than reason, right, more than reason of a single person or a single individual or a single philosopher or a single, or for that matter, a single group of individuals, right? For him, the experiences of the past, which have been passed on for generations, over centuries, experiences which have been accumulated, that experiences has a lot of wisdom and lessons to be taught than over a thought or a reason of a single person or a single philosophy or a single group of individuals. For him, for Burke, the ideal and the practical, what is practical and what is ideal are inseparable. They are the same. And you see, this is very similar to Cicero. And well, of course, I'm going to mention what Cicero is talking about also. But then for Burke, for Burke, what is practical is inseparable from what is ideal. It is very similar to what Hegel, right, the great German philosopher, the great German philosopher, Hegel would say, what is real is what is what is what is real is rational, what is rational is real, right? Right. So more along the same line. Obviously, they're not the same, but I'm just saying, just for the sake of saying it, that the practical and the ideal are inseparable. And what he means by that is that he's echoing here the political thoughts of the great Roman philosopher, statesman, and orator Cicero, right? Cicero also highlights the essentiality of wisdom of the ages, right? He talks a lot about, because he was talking about how do we preserve the Roman Republic. Remember, Cicero, in Cicero's time, the Roman Republic was about, the Roman Republic was in its twilight zone, was in its twilight years, right? Was coming to an end. And Cicero was trying to preserve the Roman Republic, right? Now, he was literally he was going against Caesar, right? Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was the one who brought an end to Roman Roman Republic and started the Roman Empire, right? So Cicero was trying to preserve, how do we preserve this Roman Republic, right? And so he was saying, instead of just literally destroying and diminishing and removing all the existing systems, all the existing institutions in the society, right? We should try to reform it, right? We should try to reform it because even though the present institutions may be corrupted, right? It does not mean that the roots of those institutions were corrupt. Obviously, whenever you did create an institution, whenever you did establish an institution in a society, that particular institution got established precisely because something good was it, right? Got established particularly because that institution served a purpose, right? It did serve a purpose. Only later on did that particular institution got corrupted, right? So Cicero was saying, instead of just removing it, we have to start reforming it. Why? Because that institution, even though it is corrupted now, it also embodies, right? It also embodies the experiences, right? The experiences of the past, something that is good of the past, right? Because not everything is bad or not everything is good, right? There's something good even in something bad. So that's what he was saying. So Cicero also highlights the essentiality of the wisdoms of the past, wisdoms of the ages, and also trying to work with the existing material, right? Working with whatever we have right now, whatever we have, we try to make use of whatever we have to the best of its capabilities, right? Making the best use of it to preserve the best in existing institutions. That was his ideal, right? He was trying to preserve what is best in every political institution rather than just slashing up and just removing from the roots, right? That would be imprudent. That would be just stupid, right? So Cicero was saying, no, that's not how we should do institution in removing what is bad, right? His ideals were based on the actual historical evolution of the Roman state, right? He knew his history of the evolution of this of Roman system of institutions, system of governance. He actually studied those things. He was well versed in it, and so he was saying, based on this historical evolution of the Roman state, we should try to preserve what is best and try to remove what is corrupt, remove what is bad. Thus, for Cicero, a genuine statement, right, or a would-be reformer, a genuine statement like Burke's argument, right, similar to Burke's argument. Of obviously Burke was borrowing from Cicero, but the genuine statement grasp, right? He understands, he gets it. He grasps the ideal. He grasps the ideal that he also realizes that the ideal the ideal is in the real, right? In other words, he tries to get what is best, right? Tries to establish the best from the ideal, from the bad, right? Take what is good, preserve it, remove what is bad. And for Cicero, that's what genuine statesmen, that's what genuine politicians, that's what genuine leaders, or that's what genuine reformers do. They don't just simply blindly go and remove everything, right? But they say, we'll preserve the good, remove the bad. And a genuine statement uses his political skills to steer the society towards the ideal, right? Towards what can be preserved, right? Instead of just blindly removing everything, right? So, likewise, like Cicero's ideal, Burke was saying the same thing, right? And we'll see in the next lecture how all of these thoughts, how Burke puts all of these thoughts into his devastating criticism of the French Revolution, right? It is very, very interesting read. It is a very interesting read. So please look forward to that. I look forward to it. So likewise, Burke was saying the same. Burke was echoing the same sentiments with that of Cicero. And when Burke, as well as Cicero, was talking about the practical. What is practical is in the ideal also is that practical and the real and the ideal and the practical are the same. is that, you see, what is practical cannot be gained outside of the past historical and social cultural context, right? When we say something is practical, it means something that works, something that is real, something that is concrete. So when both Cicero and Burke were saying that we have to be practical, and then you cannot understand what practical is outside of the history of a culture, or the history of a society, or the social cultural context of a society, they were making a good point, right? That was a good argument. That was a good, not argument, but that was a good statement for us to ponder, because what works in this country, in India, will not necessarily work in China or in the United States or in England, right? Or in Zimbabwe or in Australia. So what is practical here may not be practical elsewhere, right? So how do you understand the practical? The practical has to be understood within the historical and sociocultural context of a society, which to Burke was manners, habits, and customs, right? This the customs and the manners and habits where you are placed, where one is placed or situated, right? Only when you take erroneously the revolutionary appeal to the naked reason, right, that practical becomes acontextual and ahistorical. When in reality, what is prudent, what is practical, is historical and contextual. Whenever you think that, that's why there's this problem with theories, right? Theory is not real, it is just. Hence, the only way to understand the complexity of reality, you have a theory. But then what Burke and likewise Aristotle, Cicero was criticizing was that human beings tend to mistake the theory for reality, right? We tend to substitute what is real with theory, right? Theory is not real, it is just a way of understanding the reality. But then we forget that the theory is just a theory, it's not real. But then we forget that, the theory is the theory is the reality. And when we do make that mistake, right, when we do make that mistake and try to implement solutions or forms of government based on this theory, then the reality is very, very different. The result is different, just like the Arab Spring, right? Right? In mind, the theory was democracy, right? Democracy. People are free. People are bound to want. People want it, right? You have to be a person with no common sense and stupid in order for you not to like democracy. That's what you would say. But then, whenever you do try to implement democracy, what you get is chaos. What you get is destruction. What you get is loss of life. What you get is more exploitation. Right? If you don't believe me, look at the manner in which, look at what happened when the USSR, the Soviet Union, right? Whenever the Soviet Union collapsed, it collapsed, right? Whenever it collapsed, it collapsed, and it disintegrated into so many numerous new independent countries, right? Moreover, all the societies in those countries, right, all the economies of those countries collapsed, right? The value of the currency collapsed. There's no economy, right? The state government was up for sale, right? Right? Democracy. That was all because of democracy, right? They were trying to implement democratic system in former Soviet Union, and what you get is exploitation, right? The result of which we see even to this day, right? Even to this day, you see it. Look at the countries in Central Asia, right, which were the former Soviet Union republics, right? Look at Russia even now. Look at the extent of poverty over there and inequality over there. People being exploited even to this day. Those are the reminiscence, those are the residuals of what happens when you try to implement an abstract ideal, saying that, democracy is the best form of democracy is the best form of governance in the world. Why would you possibly not want to implement it? And when Russia did try to do that, what you get is what? Oligarchy, right? The rich, only the rich. The government became the rich by the rule by the rich. That's what it became. So For Burke, it was essential to take into consideration the manners and habits and customs of a society, right? Because if you remember, this view of Burke is very reminiscent of Montesquieu, because Montesquieu also highlights how context, or as he mentions in the Persian letters, customs, norms, values, and manners, and also in his spirits of the spirit of law, Montesquieu mentions environment, right? And what is environment? Nothing but the culture, socio-economic, political, religious factors of how all of these factors come together, right? And from the and from and from the general spirit, right? The general spirit of the society that affects what kind of or what sort of laws or constitutions are possible, what sorts of solutions are viable, what will work, what will not work. That, and then he also says there's no such thing as a good or a bad law, or a good law, or a good system, or a good constitutions, because all of this, what is good, depends upon the society, right? In which a particular law or a particular system of governance are instituted, right? In other words, context matters, right? In other words, context matters. If you try to implement in reality, whenever you try to implement um, a solution or a system of governance, an abstract system of governance such as democracy, right? And try to implement that in the reality by not caring about the historical context, by not caring about the cultural context, the then the in fact you will make things worse, right? In fact, you will make things worse. And that's exactly what happened in the Arab Spring, right? And if you don't believe me, ask Syria, they will tell you. Ask Yemen, they'll tell you. Ask the people of Egyptian, they'll tell you, right? Okay, so we'll stop here for today in this lecture, and and what I try to do in this lecture is simply this: is try to give you a very try to give you maybe a comprehensive view about Burke's philosophical thought, political thought, and then in the coming lectures, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use what we have discussed in this lecture and try to use and use the example of the French Revolution to show you what Burke was actually talking about. Because when Burke was his the thing is Edmund Burke, I think his political thoughts and his political philosophy is more practical than Hobbes, than Locke, than Rousseau, right? They are. I mean, in many sense, they are. That's why I want to contrast this. His that I want to show the reason why I'm doing all this is because I want to show that his political thoughts are are not based on some abstract thinking, but based on reality, right? And so that's the whole purpose. And I hope that you enjoy this video. And in the next lecture, we will discuss how they go hand in hand, how Burke's ideas are based on reality, not some abstract thinking. All right. Thanks so much. Take care, and I'll see you soon.